Hello, my name is Duncan Silcock, and today I'm going to be talking about alcohol abuse in adolescents and the role of a school psychologist in supporting those students. So first we'll do an overview of the problem at hand. So drinking is very common amongst adolescents. In fact, it's the most widely used drug and it's quite readily available. There is a survey that is run every few years by the Australian government. In Victoria, they found that 68% of students had tried alcohol. 88% of 17-year-olds had tried alcohol. 15% recorded drinking in the past week and are considered current drinkers. And 5% of students consumed 5 or more alcoholic drinks in one of the preceding 7 days, which was considered problem drinking. 5% of young adults fulfill, in a separate survey, 5% of young adults fulfilled the criteria for alcohol dependence. And as with adults, adolescents tend to underreport on these kinds of surveys, so we can expect those numbers to be a bit higher. Alcohol misuse among adolescents has quite a big effect on mental health. There is a very strong comorbidity with depression and anxiety. There are several surveys which point to early alcohol consumption leading to depression and anxiety. Although overall, the direction of the association is unknown, so they're not sure if the depression and anxiety is leading to the drinking or the other way around. Causes of drinking problem drinking among adolescents. There are lots of reasons, but a few of the bigger ones are the earlier you start, the more likely you are to be problem drinking later in adolescence. Low self-esteem problems at school can lead to it, and poor coping skills when problems arise, so using alcohol as a crutch to get through them. Family is a big predictor. If you have a family member that also has problems with alcohol, it's very likely that the adolescent will have problems as well. And friendship and social reasons as well. So peers being pressuring into drinking more by peers, or hanging out with crowds that tend to drink a lot, or having more access to it. So being friends with older people who can just buy it for you will make you more likely to have problem drinking. Alcohol tends to affect cognitive development quite a bit in adolescents. 2 particular areas, the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory and learning skills. Several studies have found that there's a reduction in the size of the hippocampus by about 10% for those who start drinking earlier at problem levels. And this area has been shown to have a unique sensitivity to alcohol during adolescence. So it's particularly vulnerable. The prefrontal lobe as well, which undergoes the most change during adolescence. And it's responsible for planning, judgment, decision-making, impulse control, and language. Adolescents with problem drinking tend to have smaller prefrontal lobes, so they don't develop as fast as their peers, which are not drinking. And these changes to the brain can ultimately lead to impaired problem-solving skills. Alcohol as well causes hangovers, which impact school. Students are far less likely to attend school at all when they have a hangover. And if they do attend school with a hangover, they have overall reduced classroom performance. Those adolescents who start drinking at problems levels as well are less likely to complete school entirely. So how does a school psychologist fit into this? School psychologists are focused on supporting growth, development, and well-being of students throughout the schooling experience. Their role is quite extensive, but when it comes to supporting students with alcohol problems, it's the 3 main things that you might see them doing is cognitive assessment, because as we discussed before, it can affect cognitive development, and that will need to be assessed and treated. Psychological interventions and therapies, that would be directly targeting the problem alcohol behaviours. And mental health assessment, because as was also mentioned, it's very comorbid with anxiety and depression, so there may need to be assessments and treatments of those conditions alongside. So how does a school psychologist, what sort of supports do they offer, and what sort of programs do they offer? How do they assess? How do they assess the problem? So the most common one used is the Alcohol Use Disorders Identification Test, also known as AUDIT. It's a very reliable measure, particularly with adolescents, and it's specific to alcohol, and has shown it does a very good job at gauging the level of alcohol dependence. If alcohol is not the only problem drug, the school psychologist might use a more general measure, which includes things like the alcohol smoking substance involvement screening test, ASSIST, which is developed by the World Health Organization and is administered by psychologists, or the CIR-FFT screening tool, which has the benefit of being self-reported and has been validated against the DSM. Now, how psychologists treat students with alcohol abuse problems. So it can be done at school. It can be done one-on-one in therapy sessions during school hours, and that would involve usually cognitive-based therapy. Because cognitive-based therapy is used because there is a lot of research supporting it in changing behaviours generally, and also in specifically addressing problem drinking behaviours. It focuses on developing self-regulation skills. And in terms of the reasons that drive adolescents drinking, it addresses some of the peer-related reasons. So recognising situations and environments that might lead to drinking, and coming up with some strategies to deal with those environments and situations. In more recent years, family-based therapies have been becoming more common in Australia, and more research is being done. This has been found to be even more effective than cognitive-based therapies when it comes to curbing alcohol behaviours. So it targets alcohol problems at the family level, which we'll address as we mentioned before. If a parent has an alcohol problem, it's more likely that the adolescent will. The Strengthening Families program is the most common one used at the moment. While it's mostly run at homes, it does run at schools also around Australia. This program generally involves sessions over a very long period of time, and it will be with the psychologist and family members along with the adolescents themselves. So it really is like a group approach. So how a school psychologist assesses depression and anxiety. As mentioned before, it's often comorbid with alcohol problems, so a school psychologist likely will want to assess these at the same time if they think there are drinking problems with the student. So this process generally starts with an interview about a general interview about home life, school life, general well-being, among other things, to get a sense of where the student is at, how they're feeling, and what's going on in their life. If there are any flags, if things seem concerning to the psychologist based on this interview, then they'll follow up with a relevant assessment. So this will give the psychologist a better idea of what kind of depression or anxiety the student is suffering with and the severity of it. A few of the common ones used in Australia include Brecht's Depression Inventory, BDI, Depression Anxiety Stress Scales, and the Hamilton Depression Rating Scale. So how school psychologists treat students with anxiety and depression. So first and foremost, therapies again can be done at school during school hours, but they generally need to be on the back of a good positive therapeutic relationship in the first place. It's very hard to do any kind of therapies with a student that doesn't like the psychologist in the first place. And it also depends on the severity of the symptoms. If it's severe enough, it likely won't be treated at school. It'll be psychologists will refer them out of school. For depression and mid to mild symptoms, so cognitive-based therapy again can be very effective in curbing some of the depressive. Has been proven to be effective at treating depression. Several different relaxation therapies have also been proven to be effective, and just exercise as well. Encouraging the student to exercise, maybe organising some way for them to do more exercise through school has been proven to help. More severe symptoms might require medication and therefore a referral, and this is also the case for anxiety. Anxiety tends to focus on guided self-help techniques, so that's developing skills around problem solving, stress management, activity planning, and psychoeducation. So learning about the actual anxiety itself, some strategies about coping with anxiety so that students can help themselves. And again, cognitive-based therapy comes into this because that again has been proven to be effective at treating anxiety disorders among adolescents. So school psychologists also assess learning difficulties. As mentioned earlier, it can affect various parts of the brain and can slow development if drinking at an earlier age. So the psychologist may want to do a Wechsler intelligence scale. So there's two versions of this. If it's an older student, 16 or older, they'll use the adult one. Otherwise, they'll be using the child one in a high school context. It measures intelligence across four main scales, so verbal comprehension, perceptual reasoning, working memory, and processing speed index. And given the areas of the brain that alcohol tends to affect the most with development, we would see a focus on the verbal comprehension and the processing speed index. So how this all comes together. So school psychologists don't just treat students in a room at the corner of the school and then send them back out again. They have an integrated approach. They work with teachers, they work with parents, they work with everyone. And this is usually through what is called an independent education plan. This is a Victoria-specific initiative. This will be usually in the form of meetings involving lots of different stuff. It'll be coming up with a tailored plan for the student depending on their needs. So if they are having a cognitive problem, then maybe a modification to the curriculum, something like that, or organising education support in classroom. And it can be behaviour support strategies. So if they're having problems with certain behaviours in class, even in or out of school, these sorts of things can be discussed during an independent education plan meeting. These will be involving teachers, school psychologists, wellbeing staff, aides or any support workers that work with students. Will involve parents and senior school staff, so usually principal staff or head of the program for students with disabilities, things like that. I've been involved in a few meetings for independent education plans as an aide for students. And it really is where all of it comes together. We take all of the assessments that have happened. We get everyone to put the information together. The student can be involved as well to tailor the best strategy possible to get the student well, to get the students the best outcomes they can at school. Thank you for listening to my presentation.